It's a cold open. It's a very, very, very cold open on this very summery Friday here. And we're glad to be back with you on MedTech Crossroads. We're changing the show's format up just a little bit. And I think it's going to be fun. It's going to be good for a lot of the replays that people are doing on YouTube. We're getting a lot of views on YouTube, which is really cool. We're still doing the live show. Always going to be doing the live show because that's how I get motivated to be with you here today, to talk about things. We get comments from time to time, and we really, really enjoy those. But what we're going to do next is actually, I'm going to tell you a little bit something. It's going to be a little bit of a pitch about MedTech Crossroads. I don't usually have to pitch, but here I'm going to have to pitch. This is amazing. Because we're going to make a little channel trailer for our YouTube channel. And you, if you're here live today with us, get to hear it live for the only time in history. So I hope you enjoy it. I'm gonna read this this opening, and then we'll go from there. Do you want a deeper understanding of how MedTech development actually happens? Are you excited to learn how all the moving parts work together? Do you want to quickly find the next step forward for your project? Do you love being efficient and motivated with your resources? If any of these describe you and you enjoy bringing brand new ideas for healthcare products into being, then MedTech Crossroads is where we dive into all of that. I'm your host, Gene Paranak. MedTech Crossroads is brought to you by the development team at Into Being and by the amazing MedTech community here in Michigan that surrounds us and teaches us. This show never would have started or stayed without our community. FDA regulatory process, startup life, market research, technical development, reimbursement, fundraising, intellectual property, project management, testing, manufacturing, early prototyping to post-market. Every week we take the latest FDA and industry news, as well as local events, as a starting point, and then unpack it all through our unique lens in the MedTech development community. Commentary, education, and interviews are how we roll. So here's the bottom line. Time spent learning for free from MedTech Crossroads will save you headaches in your MedTech commercialization process. The show is live every Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern on YouTube and as an interactive Zoom webinar, and the individual segments are posted throughout the week following. If you like what we're doing, please take just a moment to subscribe to us on YouTube. So like I said, this week we've switched up the schedule just a bit. We're going to leave time for questions after the news. And while we're waiting for questions, that's when we'll do the local events. So if you're with us every week and you're used to the local events happening, about right now, it's not going to happen this week. This week, we're going to start by soliciting your questions or events. Maybe there's things that you have happening in your part of the ecosystem that you want us to know about and to share with folks. We would love to do that. We'll do it in this show today. You've got the next 20 minutes to tell us about it. You can get to us at contact@medtechcrossroads.com, or you can do it through Zoom. You can get to us there as well. You can also comment through YouTube as well. So anywhere you want to get to us, please feel free to reach out and tell us what's happening in your world or your questions, maybe from a previous show. Maybe you've got a development question. Maybe you've got a regulatory question. Maybe you've got a fundraising question. We would love to take those, and if we can't answer them live, we'll be happy to answer them on an upcoming show, or maybe even get a guest in who can better answer the question than I can. We're always happy to do those sorts of things. So we're going to go next up, while you're thinking about that, to the FDA and industry news. We've got 3 great segments coming up right next. And this first one from the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, the Patient Engagement Collaborative, or PEC. That's an interesting name. The idea for this has actually been around since 2017, but what is it? Well, the Patient Engagement Collaborative is a group of patient organizations and individual representatives who discuss how to achieve more meaningful patient engagement in medical product development and other regulatory discussions at the FDA. So what's really cool about this is FDA is actually bringing real patients, or people who advocate for patients, or people who care for patients, in to talk about the patient experience. If you've had to be a patient, you know that it can usually stand some improvement. And there are ways that the medical devices themselves, how people are trained to use them, how the devices themselves work, can be made a lot better. And so I'm glad that this is a focus, not only for industry, but also for FDA. So this patient engagement collaborative exists. And in fact, this was started in 2017 because in public comment, patient communities commented to FDA that, having a group to provide input on patient engagement across the agency might not be a bad thing. They took example from the European Medicine Agency's Patients and Consumers Working Party. So there was actually an example of patients getting to talk to the regulatory agency about their experiences. If you were to be a part of this, and here's the thing, are you a patient? Are you a caregiver? Are you somebody who works alongside patients in a way that would give you a voice into their experience? You can apply for this committee. You can apply. You don't have to be in MedTech development. You don't have to be a doctor. You don't have to be a regulator. If you're a patient with a lot of experience, or you are a caregiver who can really advocate for patients, this could be for you. If you were included in this discussion topics, things that the agency would be talking about with you as a group, creating new models for patients to collaborate as partners in the medical product development and regulatory review process, thinking about ways to make patient engagement more systematic as opposed to having to create a whole PEC just to make it happen, ways to improve transparency, enhancing communication tools between the FDA and the patient community. Maybe you would be involved in making that, or educational tools, or at least advising on what could be made, both towards the patient community as well as on the medical product regulatory process. How should patients be engaged in that? So like we said before, members to this process can be patients, they can be caregivers who have a personal experience supporting someone with a health condition. They could be a caregiver, a parent, child, partner, family member, or friend, as well as representatives from patient groups. Those would be like advocacy folks who have worked with a particular type of patient for a number of years. So here's the thing. The new PEC member application period at FDA is open. PEC members participate in 2 to 4 virtual meetings per year, so you don't have to travel. You've just got to get on Zoom 2 to 4 times a year. They're looking for up to 8 new members, and they're for 2-year appointments beginning in January of 2024. But here's the thing, they're only taking 75 applications. So like if all the people who watched this video signed up for it, they'd be full, right? So take a gander at this. If you know somebody, maybe you know somebody who is been a patient or been engaged in advocacy for a particular patient type, they should know about this. They can go, the link is in the YouTube description. They should go, at least apply, submit their resume. I don't believe there's any pay for this, but if you're really passionate as a patient or a caregiver, an advocate, this is a place where you can get involved with FDA directly and have something to say to contribute to the process. So it's going to become one of our new mottos here at MedTech Crossroads, but time spent learning for free from MedTech Crossroads will save you headaches in your MedTech journey. So what can we learn from this patient engagement lesson that we just heard about, that patients can get engaged with FDA? Some of the application areas that we want to bring back to your attention more regularly include the FDA regulatory process, startup life, market research, technical development, reimbursement, fundraising, intellectual property, project management, testing, and manufacturing. I selected 5 of these today for this patient engagement aspect. Now, I chose FDA regulatory process, startup life, fundraising, project management, and testing. And longtime listeners of the show will know that if we start talking about patients and usability, it affects every part of the development process, all the way from your fundraising, all the way to your post-market work. But let's think about just a few things related to that. Everything that we do does flow ultimately from the user. Now, that could be the patient or the caregiver. But in this case, patient concerns, the fact that FDA is trying to consider those better and to actually involve patients in the process, it really should be companies that are leading the way. So the admonition here would be to get to know your user. That comes down in very practical ways like usability. But let's go to that fundraising aspect. Your funders will care a lot, your investors will care a lot if you're actually talking to real users, if you actually have an idea what the market is like. There's too many pitch decks out there where they have all the projections from market size and they make a guess that they're going to capture somewhere between 1 and 10% of that market, and look how great it's going to be. But the reality is, unless you know how that's going to get to those users and whether those users are going to adopt it, what their actual concerns are, chances are you could get all the way through the development process, all the way through the regulatory process, ramp up manufacturing, only to find that your users don't really like the product, it doesn't meet their need, and it won't address where they truly are as humans. So I think this actually provides an interesting opportunity, because companies can be motivated to try to stay a step ahead of the FDA. If FDA is talking to patients about their experience, then companies, shouldn't you be talking to your patients, to your users? You can then go back and compare your notes, because these meetings are going to be publicly available information. What FDA is learning from them is publicly available. If you go down to the link on YouTube in the description, you'll find that you can see all the past meetings of the patient engagement committee. And you can see if what they're saying lines up with what your company is finding in your market research. And I didn't flag market research. Maybe I should have there. Why did I flag startup life? Well, regulatory process is obvious. If FDA is going to be asking user questions and talking to patients, then they're going to bring those to the clearance process. They're definitely going to bring them to the clearance process. So it's going to affect you there. But why startup life? Well, because what you're experiencing in your startup comes down to all these other factors. If FDA is going to be asking you about this, you got to make it part of your culture going out and talking to users. Every day we see startups who are academic, naive to their user base. Other times we see startups that are passionate about their user base. Sometimes they themselves were patients. Sometimes they themselves were doctors or are doctors who care about this condition deeply. And it often motivates them to do interviews of patients, show them early prototypes, show them early demos. Now, of course, FDA is not going to ask these patients in this advisory committee, what do you think about company X's product? That's not going to be the point at all. But this should just raise in your company culture a focus on the user, on the patient, thinking about them, interacting with them, getting their opinion. Because if FDA is, shouldn't you? How about project management and testing? Here's where it really meets the road. People always want to jump ahead. They want to go to, I've got my design, I must be ready to manufacture it. Oh, and I guess testing fits in there somewhere. So let's talk about these two together. Testing, verification and validation of your medical device comes down to the requirements and the user needs that you set at the outset of the project or developed along the way. Where do those requirements come from? Well, sure, some of them come from industry standards or risk analysis, which you sometimes can do sitting at your desk. But a lot of them flow downstream from what's going to make a usable product for your users, for your patients. And a lot of that, if you're not talking to them and you make forward progress, it might be negative progress or it might be neutral progress. because you think I'm developing a product, but if we come back 6 months later and we find out that the user wanted something, that the patients needed something, that they were happy with certain types of solutions, but they weren't happy with other types of solutions, you're actually backing up at that point. Sometimes that progress can be entirely wiped out if the way that you mean for this product to interface with that patient suddenly isn't acceptable anymore. So all of this just a motivation to get out there and think about those patients. Do you have comments? Do you have questions about this? Do you have something to add to this discussion? How can thinking about patients increase the efficiency of the process that we're all engaged in out here in the world of MedTech development? Feel free to drop a note in the YouTube comments, or to pop it into Zoom. Those of you listening on Zoom, we'd love to hear from you. You can also reach us at contact@medtechcrossroads.com. And as always, if you like what you're hearing, please do subscribe to us on YouTube. We need a breakthrough. It reminds me of Star Trek back in the 60s, even though I wasn't around then. I watched it in reruns. We need a breakthrough. Giving her all I can, Captain, right? What is the Breakthrough Devices Program? It's a voluntary program for certain medical devices and device-led combination products that provide for more effective treatment or diagnosis of life-threatening or irreversibly debilitating diseases or conditions. That's great. I want you to pay attention to life-threatening or irreversibly debilitating diseases or conditions. We'll come back to that in a moment. But if the product that you're working on you believe meets this, then stay tuned, because this is a really cool program that FDA has had for a number of years. It's the reworking of a program that used to be out there. But what does it give? The benefits of the breakthrough device pathway or program, sprint discussions are the primary one. It's really weird to have FDA saying, hey, we haven't heard from you in a little while. Do you want to chat? The sprints are a much more, how do I say it, normal way of interacting with the FDA. Your colleagues in industry, if you want to have a chat, you email them and you say, hey, we'd like to talk about this. Maybe a meeting gets scheduled, an agenda gets put together. You have the meeting and meeting notes come out of it. You all say, did we make a decision? And if the answer is yes, you move on with your life and your future interactions. That's kind of what a breakthrough device pathway sprint discussion can be like. It's not the whole process of needing to submit a formal Q-sub and then waiting while the FDA responds to it, and then coming back 65 days later and maybe having a teleconference or an in-person. It's a much quicker turnaround, or at least can be. How many of these have happened? As of March 31st of this year, 2023, CDRH and CBER, Center for Devices and Radiological Health, as well as the Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research, have granted 794 breakthrough device designations. I don't know how many submissions were made, but it's about 800 that were granted. It's been ramping up, but ironically declined last year. 2015, there were only 11, 12 in 2016, 19 in 2017, 55 in 2018, ramping up to 206 by 2021, but it dropped off in 2022. I guess people must have sort of taken a break during COVID, maybe not as many applications. Only 64 by March of 2023, but let's think about that for a second. January, February, March, that's actually only a quarter of the year. So we could be on track to be up in the 200s again here in 2023. So you're up against, a couple hundred other folks. Remember what we said before, we're going to keep coming back to it. You have to be a life-saving or effective treatment or diagnosis of life-threatening or irreversibly debilitating diseases or conditions. You want a little crib sheet here on who tends to be getting these. The majority, I shouldn't say the majority, the highest count were in cardiovascular, followed by neurology and orthopedic. Something like dental, only 3 have been granted. Obstetrics, only 4 have been granted. So again, if you do have a life-saving application in any of those lower ones, great. It might actually be of interest to the agency. But the large number here coming through in cardiovascular, neurology, and orthopedics, as well as gastroenterology and urology. How many breakthrough device pathway submissions have made it through all the way to a clearance? About 8%. Of the 794, 67 have made it through to a clearance. Now, I don't know if that's good or bad. It just is what it is, because obviously a lot of these can still be in process. But don't think that getting a breakthrough device pathway instantaneously means you're going to get clearance or you're going to get it quickly. It's really just a way for the conversation with FDA to happen more quickly and more efficiently. So it's worth it for the process, but it's not necessarily a guarantee that you're going to get cleared. If it was a guarantee that you're going to get cleared, this would be a much, much higher number. Well, how can you be eligible for the breakthrough device pathway? The device needs to provide for more effective treatment or diagnosis of life-threatening or irreversibly debilitating human diseases or conditions. So veterinary's out. You're not getting through it for a veterinary product. It doesn't have to, this doesn't have to be an absolute moonshot, though. I just got to be clear on that. It needs to be more effective treatment or diagnosis of life-threatening or irreversibly debilitating human diseases or conditions. It also has to meet at least one of the following. It has to represent a breakthrough technology, or no approved or cleared alternatives exist, or it offers a significant advantage over existing approved or cleared alternatives, and getting it out there is in the best interest of the patients. So if it's a completely different technology for something that already exists, okay, might be eligible. If nothing else exists out there, it might be eligible. If you're just a lot better than what's out there, it might be eligible. Or even only if just getting this in front of patients is compelling to the agency, you also might be eligible. But what is the key? Diagnosis or treatment of life-threatening or irreversibly debilitating human disease or conditions. What if you're not a device intended for that? You can consider the Safer Technologies program. We're not covering that in this segment, but it is available. We've covered it before on the show. And the Safer Technologies program is sort of a breakthrough pathway light for technologies that don't represent life-saving technologies. So how do you apply for this? How do you get one? You need to submit a designation request for a breakthrough device, which is a type of Q submission. A pre-sub is a Q submission, so is a designation request for a breakthrough device. It should be the only request. You're not going to send something to FDA saying, hey, can we have a breakthrough? And oh, by the way, do you like our clinical trial design? That's not what we're going to do. But designation request by itself is the way to go for that. You're going to include a few things in it. The FDA recommends your designation request include information to describe the device, the proposed indication for use. Pay attention to that. Indication for use, we're going to come back to that in a moment. The regulatory history, how your device meets the statutory criteria for a breakthrough device. That was what we were talking about a minute ago. You saw how we needed to be basically life-saving and meet at least one of those 4 criteria. And then what type of marketing submission you plan to submit to the FDA for your device. Is it going to be a 510K? Is it going to be a de novo, etc.? How long to get one of these? Well, the FDA intends to request more info from you within 30 days if you submit a breakthrough device designation request. And they intend to make a determination for you within 60 days of receiving your request. Well, and like we said, time spent learning for free from MedTech Crossroads will save you headaches in your MedTech journey. So how does this apply, this little learning about the breakthrough device program? Application areas that we want to consider every time we talk about one of these things in the news. The FDA regulatory process from our perspective as a community, startup life, market research, technical development, reimbursement, fundraising, intellectual property, project management, testing, and manufacturing. This one is all about indications for use. It's all about intended use. In order to submit a breakthrough device designation to the FDA, you need to know what you're claiming. And if you're a longtime listener of the show, you'll know that this is always point number one. Before we can talk about what your regulatory process is, before we can talk about what your project management of your product development process is going to look like, before we can tell your funders what is it going to take to fundraise for this, to be able to make this product, before you know what you're going to test, you need to know what your intended use of your device is. And oftentimes people do not understand their intended use. They understand their technology. They understand how the device works, but they don't understand the value proposition, what the device is bringing to the patient. The favorite example that we've used many times and we use in live presentations when we're educating people about the medical technology development process and the medical product development process is that of a scalpel. If you have a scalpel, it's a class 1 device from FDA. It's good for cutting tissue. Well, that's all fine and good, but there are products out there that look identical to scalpels. One of them is called a cervical cone knife. It's a class 2 device. It requires a much larger process, even though the final product is a sharpened blade that looks, for all the world, like a scalpel. They're both sterile, they're both sharp, but one requires a lot more regulatory process, a lot more testing. There's more project management involved. If you were fundraising for it, there would be a lot more fundraising required, and it's going to change your startup life. So understanding the indications for use, the intended use, what you say the product is good for, and in what context it will be used, you're going to need that to submit for a breakthrough. If you hope to benefit from sprint discussions with the FDA, understanding above all else, how is my testing going to go during my development process? You really want to understand what you're claiming the device does. Downstream from there, you want to understand what user needs you have, what technical requirements you have, of course, what risks and what standards you need to meet. But to be able to have this accelerated conversation with FDA, you need to become an expert on what your intended use implies about your development process. And it's going to affect all of these things here, including your technical development and your manufacturing and everything else. But we highlighted the ones in green because they seemed to be the most germane to the subject. So I hope you enjoyed that on Breakthrough Device Pathway. You can, if you like what you heard, subscribe to us on YouTube, and look forward to seeing you on the live show every Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern. Well, this one really caught my attention. This is the Inspire Upper Airway Stimulation. All the content here is provided by FDA. This device, when I saw this, I thought, oh, it must be like a heart stimulator or something. But wait, no, this lead is going up into the head, and there's a generator implanted along with a respiratory sensing lead in the body. This was a PMA, a pre-market authorization with FDA. So not easy to get. And I'm sure many listening to this some are coming because you're interested in product development and how product development hurdles are overcome and how regulatory hurdles can be overcome. Some of you are coming because you probably experience sleep apnea, and And whereas, my first reaction to this is who would implant something into their body to deal with obstructive sleep apnea? And I think the answer, the more I humbly consider it, is quite a few people would be willing to do that to get away from the burden of a CPAP mask every night. So nevertheless, it is a PMA, pre-market authorization. There is risk associated with it. Obviously, everything we say here is neither medical nor legal advice. We're just telling you what FDA said about this product, and then reflecting on it from our perspective as a MedTech development firm and MedTech development community. So here's what it is. The Inspire Upper Airway Stimulation System is an implantable nerve stimulator. So it sends little electrical shocks to treat obstructive sleep apnea. And it can be programmed, and there's a patient remote. Who is it for? People with obstructive sleep apnea who, I'm sorry if this is a little bit pedantic, but we're just going to go through it really quick because some of you are interested in this, who have an upper limit baseline AHI of 100. This has been increased from 65 to 100. The approval also increases the upper limit for recommended body mass index to 40, from 32 to 40. How does it work? This device detects the patient's breathing pattern and maintains an open airway by stimulating the nerves using small electrical impulses. The doctor can program stimulation settings using the external physician programmer. You turn it on before you fall asleep, and you turn it off when you wake up, which I find absolutely fascinating because it's very much like we've seen TENS units out there and other things like that. And one has to imagine they've gotten this to a level where you can sleep and it's not annoying. Certainly gives you pause to think, wow, it's going to be instructing my muscles to respond. But I guess if you think about things like pacemakers and things like that, we've been doing this as implantables for quite a few years. When is it used? It's not for everybody. This is used to treat people with moderate to severe obstructive sleep apnea who are not able to use or tolerate PAP or BiPAP treatments. So if you can't use PAP or BiPAP, this could actually be a lifesaver. Also, you can't have a complete blockage or collapse of the parts of your airway that would matter here. So this is people 22 and older who can't tolerate PAP or BiPAP. But it's also used for people between the ages of 18 to 21 are not candidates for surgery to remove the adenoids and tonsils. It's something we've been involved in before, is adenotonsillectomy. And if you can't get your adenoids and tonsils removed, so you have an obstruction back there because they're swollen, and you've been considered for other treatments, then you might be eligible for this implantable system. Now, there are certainly contraindications on this, but we're not going to tell you all those right now. You can go to the website, FDA's website, and you can dig down there to learn more about this system if you're interested. But as always, time spent learning for free from MedTech Crossroads will save you headaches in your MedTech journey. We like to apply these news articles to MedTech Crossroads application areas: FDA regulatory process, startup life, market research, technical development, reimbursement, fundraising, intellectual property, project management, testing, and manufacturing. And on this one, for this sleep apnea stimulator, it's implantable. And as unappealing as that sounds to so many of us, if you're suffering from it and you have to wear a mask every night, or you can't wear a mask, as is the criteria for this device, it might be a lifesaver. So which ones did we flag here? I flagged to talk about the FDA regulatory process, startup life, market research, reimbursement, and fundraising. Why? Because I want to bring it all down to one point, which is the tech transfer chasm. It's really cool to see a device of this maybe not complexity, but invasiveness, making it all the way to market with a addressable market and clear expectations around it. But for every project that makes it there, there are hundreds that never do. And oftentimes they're just a idea in the eye of their creator, sometimes behind the walls of the university, sometimes the product of somebody who's a clinician out there doing cool things and innovating. What often happens in these situations is that a person says, you know, I could stimulate those muscles just like a TENS unit, just like a pacemaker. I could stimulate those muscles, and I bet I could keep that airway open. I bet I could keep it patent. Well, that seems objectively true. Somebody did that. But here's where it often goes off the rails with so many startups and so many projects. They don't recognize the burden. So let's go first to the regulatory process. They don't understand that that device that would stand in for a CPAP is nothing like a CPAP. It's not even a Class 2 device. It's turned into a Class 3 device. And so by misidentifying the regulatory hurdles associated with the development process, they're going to end up in a world of hurt. That world of hurt is going to be centered around the idea of how much they need to fundraise. Because as it turns out, getting a PMA cleared is incredibly more expensive than getting a Class 2 device cleared through the 510K or de novo process. So the fundraising is going to go off the rails. But there's another aspect, and that's reimbursement. To understand how reimbursement plays in, CPAPs are a highly refined, really billing system. I feel like CPAPs have turned into a billing system these days, reporting back, compliance, and everything else. What would the reimbursement be for this new pathway? Is it eligible? Has CMS set a code? How does the pricing compare? It's got to cost more to implant something into somebody than it does to hand them a CPAP machine and tell them to use it. So the chasm here between the initial idea that technically is completely feasible, as we've seen, and how do you get there? It's really a matter of counting the cost, understanding that regulatory pathway, understanding that reimbursement pathway, surrounding yourself with investors who want to walk that path with you and who are willing to do it and who understand the magnitude of what you're biting off. It doesn't mean that more invasive solutions can't be good. It just means you have to understand that it is a more invasive solution and that it's leading you to a pathway that's going to be harder. This changes your entire startup life. But one more thing to flag, the market research, what you need to do to enable your technical development process. We're not even flagging technical development or project management or testing or manufacturing because all of these things are downstream of understanding what does your market really need. Are there people whose pain point is such that because they can't get access to CPAP because they don't qualify, or because they don't qualify for adenotonsillectomy, they might be willing to use such an invasive implantable device? And so it motivates you to get in there and do that market research long before the technical development happens. Sure, there's project management hurdles, and with the PMA, they're very, very large. Intellectual property is kind of what it is. If you're in a niche space and you found something really cool, well, good for you. That's not really affected here. Testing and manufacturing, of course, are part of it, but they're all downstream of this question of have you really counted the cost? If you think to yourself, we can be better than a CPAP because we've got an implantable, well, that may be true. But you've got to understand the price point. You've got to understand the market. You've got to understand that regulatory pathway. And you've got to have a team of investors around you who understand, accept, and embrace the risks to getting that product to market. Hey, if you like what you're hearing, subscribe to us on YouTube. And you can watch the live show every Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern on Zoom or on YouTube Live. Well, those are our news segments for today. How'd we do, Steve? This is like a completely new thing for us. We're doing this differently, but not differently.
This is definitely different today. I think it's going good, though.
You're keeping up with it. I appreciate that.
Keeping up back here.
See, this is the thing. This is like the Patreon thing, right? If you're here, and you are here, thank you to our listeners live here, both on Zoom, some listeners on Zoom and some listeners on YouTube. You get to hear all the banter. You're not going to necessarily hear all this banter when these segments get cut down into the smaller stuff. So I don't know if that's a perk. Maybe I shouldn't have said that. As always, contact at medtechcrossroads.com or put your questions into Zoom or on YouTube. We would love to hear from you if it's something that was brought up by one of the segments that we just did, or if it's an event you have coming up in the local ecosystem. We'd love to hear about it. We're going to go in just a second to the upcoming events, but I don't know, Steve, anything popped to your mind as we were going through any of those?
Not in particular. I mean, the fact that there's an implantable alternative to CPAP is certainly interesting, but like you said, it's relatively invasive compared to a external device. So it'll be interesting how much market share they can really manage to achieve with that long term.
I think that's the key, right? Like, yeah, how much market share can they achieve? Because I know that any number of people, when they come to us at Into Being, they say, oh, there's an amazing market for my device. And then they go and they quote some percentage of, like, you know, the CPAP market. We're going to take this much market share. And then a product like this, it finally comes down and it turns out, well, you can't actually displace CPAP. You can only use it in the places where CPAP can't be used. And any process of overtaking that's going to be one of years. And then it's like, oh boy, was the juice worth the squeeze? It's better to count that up front. Yeah, I think you're right on the market share comment. That's great. Well, next up, we're going to talk about upcoming events. In upcoming events, we like to scour websites, especially local ones, but also U.S. Food and Drug Administration, as well as Ann Arbor Spark, RAPS, the Regulatory Affairs Professional Society, MishBio, and Project MedTech. And as always, events that Michigan Economic Development Corporation is putting on, we try to bring those to you as well. First up, July 20th, a webcast, final guidance, content of pre-market submissions for device software functions. On July 20th, link in the YouTube description. The FDA is going to host a webinar for industry and other interested stakeholders to discuss this final guidance document. Why do we flag this? Because doing device submissions for software functions, whether the device is entirely software or whether the device is controlled by software, matters a lot. So knowing how FDA is thinking about software on any given day is really, really useful. So have a look at that if you're interested in device software clearances. Coming up in Royal Oak, did we get the date there? August 22nd. MishBio and Avantor are partnering to bring a networking event to Royal Oak. That one is free to MishBio members, $10 for all others, 5 to 7 p.m. at the Brown Iron Brewery on Woodward Avenue in Royal Oak. Always great events. Speaking of great events, Thursday, July 27th at MIHQ, a great facility out there on the west side of Ann Arbor, the STEM Biosocial Networking Cocktail Hour, sponsored by Cayman Chemical and Kyogen, Thermo Fisher Scientific. And just love what Matthew Himes is doing with the biosocial. So it should be great, a great event. The Midwest Showcase is happening August 30th in Cleveland, Ohio. I will be there. I see that Stephen Rapundolo, Tom Shehab, as well as a number of others will be down there. Thanks to Dwayne and others at Project MedTech. August 30th in Cleveland, Ohio. Link in the YouTube description. You want a pitch competition? Resi, Boston, September 18th through 20th. The Innovators Pitch Challenge is now accepting applications. Deadline is August 9th. If you want to go out and pitch. Resi, I've been to this conference before. It is a good conference. There are investors there. There are startups there. So if you want to meet startups or meet investors, probably a nice place to go. Resi, Boston, September 18th through 20th. And the 2023 Michigan Life Sciences Showcase, 5 of MishBio's signature events, all happening on one day. Drug Discovery Symposium, Medical Device Summit, Digital Health Forum, Cannabis Science Symposium, and Patient Advocacy Forum with dedicated tracks for each event and an exhibit floor, as well as technology presentations and networking opportunities. So that'll be happening September 18th in Lansing. And the 2023 Fall on Demo Day, we just got this email today. You can reach out to Christina D. at Ren VCF. It's going to be happening at Ford Field, October 10th through 11th. Lots of investors, lots of startups. The 2023 Fall on Demo Day, if you're a startup and you want to apply, you can email Christina at christinad@renvcf.com or find the link in the YouTube description. And the MedTech conference is coming to Anaheim, California, the Anaheim Convention Center, October 9th through 11th this year. The Startup Symposium is coming to Houston, Texas, October 25th and 26th from Project MedTech. The 2023 AI Summit is coming to Columbus, Ohio, November this year. And we told you about it last year. We're going to tell you about it again. The Eye and the Chip 2023, a 3-day World Research Congress to accelerate progress towards a nanoelectric device affording some useful level of artificial vision. October 8th through 10th, 2023, in person at the Southfield Westin Hotel. So we had Dr. Hesberg in last year, I think, on the show, and just a wonderful person, wonderful researcher, hosting these two conferences every year. Just got to put him in touch with somebody recently. So check that out if you are interested in artificial vision. Feel free to reach out, contact at medtechcrossroads.com, or subscribe on YouTube. Thankful for each one of you. We're taking a look here to see if there's any hands raised or any emails sent. I don't think we're seeing anything today in terms of questions or hands raised, but we're going to take just a moment there. Yeah, not seeing anything come through today, but we are thankful for you today. Thanks to all who are listening on Zoom as well as on YouTube. We're definitely watching those YouTube subscribers go up as we we're not transitioning. We're not moving away from live. The Zoom will always be there for the foreseeable future. And 2 o'clock every Friday is when we're doing it live. Also, you're not going to get a recut of the events, right? The live show, the full episode, is where you're going to get to see the events. So if you want to know what's happening in local events, that's going to be the full live episode every week, because that changes every week. We're telling you about new events every single week, and we hope you enjoy that. So thanks for being with us here on MedTech Crossroads. Enjoy your Friday. Talk soon.